In this lesson, we'll be tweaking several final elements on the model, namely the slabs around the pool and the terrace, as well as two of the roofs that still need a little bit of design refinement. So let's get started with the slab around the pool, or in other words, the water drip tray. And what the issue is at the moment is that once you turn on the site mesh, you can see that these two parts of the building are actually supposed to be cantilevering above the ground. So you need to include some type of slab or underside to these two elements. So you could either work on top of the edit poly level of this model, or we can actually go back to the original spline that we drew, which is the profile. So let's rather go and do that, and let's select the section that we have on this side, and let's start looking at this. So right now we have an object which looks like so. I'm just going to pull it to the side. So you can see that we drew only these parts and we stopped at this point here. So what we're going to do now is just to draw an underside to this, but I'm going to basically take a shortcut from here to here just to give it a more chamfered look, which will look a lot neater as we cantilever it out. So I'm going to draw a separate spline from this point down to here and across. And basically this is now going to get attached to that original spline that we drew earlier on. So I'm just going to move it closer and then snap it onto this point, and I'm now going to attach it together. After attaching, just select your vertex in this corner. You can see that there are two selected. Right click and weld those two together. Then you can right click and make sure that it's a corner. And once you release that, then the entire object will be updated according to this profile. You may need to go and select all of your polys again, so let's just Control A on that, and let's flip all of those. And you can see that now you have the underside. The last thing that you would want to do is just add a ceiling, so to speak, or the underside of the slab. So let's choose the border, or rather the edge would probably be better, since we don't have a full shape. And let's select this edge and just bridge those two together. So bridging them will make a slight angle there, but we don't really worry about that since we don't see it. So all of that is underground. Right, now we're going to move on to this slab here. You can have a look in the side elevation that there is a nice cantilever, so it is a tapered element. So what we want to do is at least keep it parallel in front, and then it can taper back if some of that is still revealed. So we'll select that bottom edge and let's look at it in our right view. So just right click on perspective and go down to right. Press Z just to zoom into the extents and move this edge upwards till roughly over there until these two match up. This edge thickness will generally be given to you by an engineer, so don't worry too much if you don't know the exact distance. It's not really that important to know those things yourself, so they will always be given to you by specialists. I'm now going to move this upwards. Instead of snapping it, I'm rather going to just do it by eye, because if you do snap it, sometimes you may dislodge it in the out of the actual plane that you're trying to move it upwards in. So sometimes snapping can lead to problems if these two elements are not perfectly above each other. So now that I have that done, I can also add an underside to this element here. So let me just go and pull that back, and I'm going to isolate this out of the way and just snap these two elements together, and then I just need to make sure that this element is straight. So I'm going to take the X value here, copy it to this one, and once that is pasted, then in my top view, this is what I'm getting. So that's going to be the underside to that slab. So as well, if you see that this angle is different, then you may need to take that and basically just snap it onto that point so that you at least get a neater edge underneath here. So once that is looking fine, let's move straight onto the roof. I'm just going to turn off the site mesh since we're now working on the roof. We don't need to see that ground plane. So what I'd like to do is I want to create a little bit more of a neat edge to this roof. I really like the way that this looks. In other words, we see the slab, we have these side walls overlapping, and everything kind of fits each other within each other nicely. And I want to create that same effect here. So what I don't like is this L portion that I have built in these two areas. So I'm going to go down to the editable poly where I can still work on the model without affecting it in a bad way. In other words, I won't have anything destroyed once I activate this top editable poly, since this one just removes my smoothing IDs. And with those 4 polys selected, I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard, and once I'm at the top level, then I have a much neater shape, and I'm a lot happier with this. Just turn that on again, and we can then just have a look at what this looks like. Now, in the real world, this would have to be treated with most likely a small parapet, or at least the drainage would have to be worked out on this, so that you would want to get all of your drainage from these portions to drain back into a safe drain and then down within a drain pipe somewhere. You don't really want any water dripping off these edges, otherwise it will make a whole big mess underneath on the balconies below. Anyway, let's move over to the last roof, which is the one sitting above the master suite. Now, the 2 things that I don't like about this right now is the downstand that we have here doesn't really look very elegant. So we want to work out something that eliminates that. Secondly, with the distance that this is cantilevering, it looks like it's at least 4 meters or more. We're going to need a lot more structural depth to make that viable. The cantilever that we have here is really strengthened a lot by this side wall, which basically acts as a huge beam. So we can basically hang as much as we want to here, and later on in the next lesson we're actually going to dig out the ground a little bit more so that we can read that cantilever a little bit clearer. So in any case, let's go back to this roof, and what I would like to do first of all is just give it more depth. So you can see here that we have an extruded spline. So let's go and give, first of all, that extruded spline a little bit more depth so that we come down to this point here. So basically the top of the frames are going to line up with the bottom of the ceiling. So I'm just going to round that number off, minus 0.8. And now you can see what's happening. This is a little bit of a design junction that we need to solve, is we have the roof interfering with these screen elements. So either you can go and cut the screen elements lower, which means that you won't really have a very pure architecture. Or what we could rather do is move this edge inwards slightly so that it lines up with this original wall underneath. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to select one of these polys and just read off the X coordinate. I'm going to copy that, Control C. And then I'm going to come in here and take this edge and just move it into that same plane. Next, what I want to do is, I'm also not very happy with how these 2 walls line up. I would like one wall to be very clearly independent of the roof. So we have 2 options. Either you can overhang the roof outwards, just like we've done here, or you could actually move it completely inwards, which may not be a bad idea because that seems to be what's happening with this wall. This seems to be like a very primary wall, and everything is happening on the other side of it. So let's go and read off the coordinates of that as well, which is this point here. I'm going to copy that distance, and I'm going to paste it in to there. So Control V and enter. Next, I would like to make this overhang a little bit deeper. I think it looks a little bit shallow. So I'm going to move it just by eye all the way until it lines up with the edge of the balcony below it. Next, I'm going to turn on my upper floor plan, and I just want to correct this angle since I have changed the actual angle of that while moving these points inwards. So I'm just going to realign that. And now that angle matches the angles of the other portions. This line that we see here is actually the line of the slab and the bottom side of the slab that we created earlier. So the angle, don't really worry about it. We don't really see it. So it's not exactly going to show in your renders. Next, what we want to do is just delete certain portions of the walls that we are now doubling. In other words, this wall is actually inside the ceiling, so we don't need to see it. So always check before editing the editable poly here whether there are any changes, and I can see just by turning this edit poly on and off that there are actually changes to the bottom slab, which means I can't actually change anything below it except for perhaps the thickness of my shelled element. So in this case, by actually doing any changes to your highest edit poly means that you can't actually edit anything below it, otherwise your entire form would be completely damaged. So just to be safe, it's a good idea just to go down and convert down to editable poly. Otherwise you could also just leave that shell modifier below it, but in most cases it's just easier to work this way. Again, it's just to be safe. So I'm now going to delete all of these elements. In other words, all of these polys that are at the top. We're not going to see them. And lastly, what I want to do is I just want to increase the height of this wall so that it lines up with the top of my roof. So that's going to be 10.4. So the result of everything that we've done is that we've pulled this roof up. We've made this ceiling a lot deeper, or at least the roof slab a lot deeper. Within it, there would most likely be a parapet. The whole thing wouldn't obviously be in solid concrete. It would just have the thickness acting as a beam, so it would have a concrete element within it or a steel element within it that would hold up this entire point. And also remember that part of the structure hangs on, or at least rests upon, a very, very narrow steel column here. So tectonically, this is very difficult to do, but very often with architecture, these are the things that clients request, and then engineers scratch their head forever until they figure that all out. Good, so now we're going to move on to the next lesson where we are going to look at the site mesh. There are a couple of things that we need to fix up on it. For example, here it's way too high, so we want to move it down. Here we want to define this cantilever a little bit more, and we also want to lift up the driveway so that we can drive in and out of our garages. Also, there's a little bit more work to do on the back here, and I'm actually going to model now off camera the walkway that we have underneath here. So there's a little walkway that leads up to the front door. So I'm going to model that. Since you've already seen me modeling slabs before, I don't need to redo that for you. And otherwise, hang on for the next lesson where we start to shape and model this terrain to better suit the house. So thanks for watching.